that we begin the khutbah with. And this is the mimbar of the Prophet ﷺ. When the Prophet ﷺ passed away, people started giving Jummah Khutbas. When he was alive, he gave the khutbah. So anyone, anywhere in the world that gives the khutbah after the Prophet ﷺ is standing in the place that he would have stood in if he was alive. Right? So when we hear his words, the way he would introduce his own khutbah, we receive his words the way the companions would have received his words. Do you understand what I'm saying? And when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam in Medina would give the khutbah, he would remind the companions, مَن يَهْدِ اللَّهُ فَلَا مُضِلَّ لَهُ وَمَن يُضْلِلْ فَلَا هَادِيَ لَهُ. That if Allah chooses to guide someone, they cannot be misguided. And if Allah allows someone to be misguided, they will not find guidance without Allah. So before we begin another khutbah, let us change our hearts to receive the Jummah Khutbah. Ya Allah, we are here to receive your gift of guidance. Yes or no? For the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, there is someone that wakes up in the morning a believer, and they will go to sleep that night a disbeliever. And there is someone else that wakes up in the morning a disbeliever, and they will go to sleep that night a believer. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow our first breath in the day to be belief. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow our last breath in the day to be belief. Let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to wake up and the first words out of our mouth are Alhamdulillah alladhi ahyana ba'da ma amatana wa ilayhi nushur. Praise be to Allah who gave us life after death, and to Him is our return. For just like every night when we go to sleep, it is a form of death. And every morning when we wake up is a form of resurrection. Brothers and sisters, every night and every morning we are practicing for the Day of Judgment. Do we know that? Every night is a small death, every morning is a small resurrection. I want to share some news from my family. A week ago, my wife's cousin, who was only 40 or so, passed away. Allah yarhamu. I was not with you all, so I couldn't share. He has a 2.5-year-old daughter. He has a small child, and he has a 7-year-old. The oldest is 7. He went to sleep at night, his family, he wanted them to go to a wedding. So he asked the rest of his family to go to a wedding, and then he passed away from a heart attack. Allah yarhamu. I'm saying this to say, how grateful are we that we woke up this morning on Jummah? Are you with me? This morning, so this was last week. This morning, this was my wife's cousin, my wife's aunt, who hosted the funeral at her home last week, passed away. Allah yarhamah. My father-in-law's sister. I'm saying this to say, this is the news I woke up to this morning of Jummah. And I had just recited the dua, Alhamdulillah alladhi ahyana ba'da ma amatana wa ilayhi nushur. Praise be to Allah who gave me life. So let us take a pause this moment. And I want all of us to inhale deeply. Inhale with shukr, with gratefulness. And exhale. Did we all do it? No, I want everyone to do it with me. A deep inhale. We are showing gratefulness that we are alive this morning. My dear brothers and sisters, how grateful are we that when we were in the womb of our mother, the number of breaths that we would be given was written for us. And Allah wrote for us. I am almost the same age as my wife's cousin who passed away. And I'm with you today. And I am grateful no matter what we are going through in life. Even if it feels like the entire world is burning, Allah has given us a breath of air today to know Him, to return to Him, and to redeem ourselves. Let us show shukr for that. For there was a righteous man, many of us know this story. He spent his entire life in worship. And then when he was dying, he was asked, do you want to go to Jannah, paradise, because of your acts of worship or because of Allah's mercy? And he said, I want to go because of the weight of my worship. He had spent his whole life worshipping Allah. He believed it was enough. So on his scale was placed after he died. all of the 70 years of constant worship, sincere worship for Allah. And on the other side of the scale was placed the blessing of a single eye. And the blessing of a single eye outweighed all of his worship. And then he very smartly said, Ya Allah, I want to go to Jannah because of your mercy. And he was entered into paradise because of Allah's mercy. Right? So let us show deep, deep gratefulness. You know, there's a story that came out of Gaza. I don't think I shared this one because it's been a few weeks since I've seen you all. My wife shared this story with me. That there was actually before we continue, could we all just make a dua for my wife's cousin Ahmad and her blessed aunt who just passed away. Both. We pray in this very moment that their grave becomes a part of their Jannah. And my father-in-law who just lost his sister and his nephew, that Allah gives sabr and strength to the family. Amen. You know, there's a story out of Gaza that's amazing. There was a young boy who was at his last breath. Some of you may have heard this story. He was what? At his last breath. And a man rushed up to this blessed boy. And he's trying to encourage him to recite the Shahada. Because he's about to return to Allah. And the boy is not able to recite Shahada. He's struggling. Are you with me, young men? This young boy in Gaza, he's at his last moment. And a man comes, he doesn't know him. And he's trying to encourage him to recite the Shahada before he dies. The dua that we just made, Ya Allah, let our last breath be Shahada. Ya Dhal Jalali wal Ikram, mitna ala deen al-Islam. Let us die on Islam, Ya Allah. It's not promised that we die on Islam. May we die on Islam. And this young boy in Gaza is not able to say the Shahada. And then he finally says it and he passes away immediately after. This man found this young boy's mother and delivered the news, your son has died. And she says, Inna lillahi raji'un. And she began to cry. But she had immense faith in Allah though, that he was returning to Allah as a shaheed. And then he said that, he was struggling to say the Shahada. But then he finally said, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu Muhammad Rasulullah before he died. And she began to cry even more. And she says, how could this be? What do you think she was crying about? That he was struggling to say the Shahada? No. She was crying that he actually said the Shahada. She said, my son is mute. He has never spoken in his life. Those are the first words he ever said. And they were his last words. His last words were the only words he ever spoke in his life, and it was the Shahada. He kept stuttering, he couldn't say it, and in the last breath, Allah gave him the blessing that he had not received his entire life to speak. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ar-Rahman. Allama al-Quran. Khalaqa al-Insan. Allamahul Bayan. Allah has taught speech. Which of the gifts of Allah will we deny? None, Ya Allah, none. Now I want to transition to khutbah. The minister of the Nation of Islam, Louis Farrakhan, who I consider to be the greatest speaker of his generation. We disagree with him on certain things, of course, and we agree with him, and we take the good and we leave the rest. Louis Farrakhan I consider to be the most eloquent speaker of his generation, perhaps. He was once speaking at the Black State of the Union address in 2004, and he said the following. He said, what time is it? Not in our time, but in God's time. For if we do not know what time it is, we may be doing the right thing at the wrong time and not get the right results. My dear brothers and sisters, what time is it in Allah's time? And this is the topic of today's khutbah. This is Allah's time. This is Allah's day. No matter what happens in this world, Allah is firmly in control. Do we believe that? You don't have to say it aloud, but do you believe it in your heart? Do we believe that when we leave home, we say, Bismillah, tawakkaltu ala Allah, wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. We need this strength. The tone I'm speaking with, we need this tone in the time that we're living in. We need a little bit of Umar energy today. We need some Khalid bin Walid energy today. Radiallahu anhuma. We need some Musa alayhi salam energy today. When we leave home, we don't leave home meek, broken. Believers, especially in this time when the world is on fire, we leave home with confidence. Bismillah, I am leaving with the name of my Lord. Who is going to touch a believer that's leaving with the name of their Lord? Are you with me? Do we know that the Prophet ﷺ said that? There's a dua that if you make it in the morning, harm cannot come to you till evening. And if you make it in the evening, harm will not touch you till the morning. Bismillah alladhi la yadurru ma ismihi shay'un fil ardi wa la fis samai wa huwa as-sami'ul alim. That with the name of Allah, Bismillah alladhi la yadurru ma ismihi shay'un fil ardi wa la fis samai wa huwa as-sami'ul alim. With His name, harm cannot touch from the earth or the sky. So when a believer leaves home, they leave with confidence. Bismillah, tawakkaltu ala Allah. I am putting my trust in Allah. Wala hawla wala quwwata illa billah. There is no power or strength except Allah. As the Prophet ﷺ said, if all the world were to gather to harm us, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't want it, they cannot touch us. And if all of the world were to gather to help us, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not allow it or permit it, they could not help us. If Allah, as we make the dua after prayer, لا معنى لما أعطيت, no one can restrict what Allah wants to give. ولا معطي لما منعت, and if Allah wants to give, no one can take it. So we begin with Louis Farrakhan's question. He said, what time is it? Not in our time, but in Allah's time. And we say it is Allah's time. This is Allah's day. This is not the day of the oppressors. They don't get the day. This is not Israel's time. Are you with me? Are you with me? This is Allah's time. And the believers find confidence in knowing whose day today is. And I will say to you, my brothers and sisters, we are actually living in a remarkable time. If you look at our history, the most memorable times in our history were the times of difficulty for the believers. I want everyone, I don't care if you're 5 years old or older than me, I want everyone to listen to these words carefully. Look back at our history and the most memorable moments. Back at your own life before we look at Muslim history. Is it not true that the most memorable times that you look back upon were also mixed with difficulty, and then Allah brought ease? Is that true or not? Is it not true that the companions said that the greatest days of their lives were the early days of Makkah when they were being persecuted? That those are considered the golden years of the seerah, when the greatest companions came to Islam. Khadija radiallahu anha never knew ease. She died before the hijrah. And she is the greatest of the ummah after the Prophet ﷺ. After her is Abu Bakr. But she never knew ease. Are you with me? So when we look at the time that we're in, I can't help but say, I mentioned this a few weeks ago in our khutbah, that we are living in a time where companions are coming back to earth. Every day in Gaza, we're seeing a story of a companion of the Prophet ﷺ. I didn't know they still existed. My entire life I wanted to meet a companion, and I'm seeing thousands of them now. In Balochistan and Pakistan. The blessed people of Balochistan have been oppressed by the Pakistani army for 70 years. And I'm Pakistani. These people have been oppressed for over 70 years. And they have come, and there is a woman who is leading their congregation. They came to peacefully sit in Islamabad. While what's happening in Gaza is happening, these people were peacefully sitting, and police came and sprayed cold water on them at night while they were already freezing cold in Islamabad or Lahore, in the freezing cold. And this woman was standing in front of these corrupt police officers with her finger in their face. And she has now become a symbol all around the world. I am saying we are living in difficult times, but we are living in beautiful times, remarkable times. times where people are coming back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are living in times where people who are not Muslim are starting to read the Quran because they want to know what are giving these people in Gaza the strength that they have. We are living in remarkable times, brothers and sisters, but difficult times. We are also living in a time, another thing that's happening in my own country in Pakistan. Over 1 million Afghanis have been kicked out of their homes and being sent to the Afghanistan border. And this is an attack on humanity. From a country that I love, a place that I am from. I am proud of being Pakistani. Not nationalistic, but I am part of the land I come from, the people I come from. But this corruption is completely un-Islamic. No matter what has happened with Afghani immigrants in Pakistan, you cannot take hundreds of thousands of families and uproot them. But guess what? Inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give those blessed Afghani brothers and sisters the reward of hijrah. Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you see how the seerah is coming back? When Israel uproots Palestinians and bulldozes their homes, we say something. We have to have the same anger when Pakistan, my country, does it to the Afghani refugees. It is wrong. They are bulldozing their homes. We will not be quiet. Even if it's against ourselves. The thing about this deen is, you will go to court and speak against yourself if it's truth. And it is wrong. But I saw the pictures. I saw a picture of children leaving their home. Wallahi, they were sitting in the desert and they were smiling. Not that they're happy. Their life is being completely changed. But there was some moment where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them a smile on their face when I saw their picture. We are living in difficult times, brothers and sisters, but we're living in remarkable times. It is in difficulty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala awakens the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But there is something very different about the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We just don't know when to quit. The ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam bends, but it does not break. Let me give you an example. My father taught me this. And for those of you who just arrived, I began the day with the news that a second family member in my wife's family had passed away today. And it gave me so much urgency in this khutbah. And after the prayer, we'll make special dua again for both of them. My wife's cousin, who was very young, leaving a 2.5-year-old. You know, when I'm holding my child now, who's almost 2, I imagine that this is a test from Allah. But even in this moment of test, Allah wants good for this family. Allah is testing, bending us, but we will not break as an ummah. You know, one of the greatest difficulties that ever reached the Muslim ummah was the Mongolian invasion. And if you were living in Baghdad during the invasion of the Mongols, on one side you have the Crusaders, on the other side you have the golden horde of the Mongolians, and they are destroying the world. Baghdad is on fire. The great library is destroyed. The sea has become black with ink from the books in the great library of Baghdad, the house of wisdom. There is and we have some young people, I'll keep it general. I won't even say this part, but the entire city is destroyed. Countless deaths. Anyone here know the video game Assassin's Creed? Okay, I connected to half the audience. I had not connected. I'm sure you're all with me before. But listen to this. Assassin's Creed, the assassins are based on this group of people. They were assassins that lived outside of Baghdad, and they used to terrorize the Sultan and the people of Baghdad. They were called the assassins. That's what Assassin's Creed is based on. The Mongolians, when they came into Baghdad, they accidentally wiped out all of the assassins just on their way in. They didn't know who they were. They just killed them on the way in. They had not been able to kill them for over 100 years. This was a test on the ummah. Where the ummah, and I mentioned this in a previous khutbah, it was during the Mongolian invasion that Rumi was writing his poetry. You think Rumi was writing his poetry in Persia, in a rose garden, when the ummah was at its peak, in a dunya sense? He was writing his poetry when the ummah was at its peak, spiritually, but was burning physically. And that heart of the poet that was burning was writing about the love of Allah in flowers when the garden was on fire. Do you understand what I'm saying? Brothers and sisters, do you understand what I'm saying? But there's something about the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ that knows that even the day that Baghdad burned was not the day of the Mongolians. It was Allah's day. And Allah had a plan. You know the thing about forest fires, right? When there's a forest fire, it makes the land more filled with nutrients, fertile. Fire burns when there's a flood and it destroys the land. When the flood is gone, the land is more fertile. That's why people would build civilizations around water. Indus Valley, Crescent Valley, right? The Crescent, Mesopotamia, ancient Mesopotamia, the ancient Nile civilizations of the Egyptians. It was built around flooding. So destruction leads to fertility. It leads to growth. So when you have a forest that's burned and then it grows back stronger, the Mongolians burned the Muslim world. And as I said, my father taught me this. That there was a time where the Golden Herd of Genghis Khan, all these guys, they were in a tent. One of the cavalry of the Mongolians. Genghis Khan wasn't there, but his lieutenants. And there was a Muslim scholar who had beautiful recitation of Quran. While these people were destroying his world, he used to go outside of their tent every morning and he would recite Quran after Fajr. Every morning these people would hear from outside of their tent the recitation of Quran, and one of the lieutenants became Muslim of the Golden Horde. And then the entire cavalry of the Mongolians came to Islam. And the very army that had destroyed the Muslim world became the Muslim army of the Mongolians and became the protectors of Islam. It was Allah's day. Allah had a wisdom even in the destruction. That flood, that fire led to growth. As we said, Umar radiallahu anhu wanted to put the Prophet ﷺ in his grave. That day he became Muslim. It wasn't like he thought about, isn't it beautiful that the worst day of Umar became his best day? And we said, the man who wanted to put the Prophet ﷺ in his grave is now buried next to the grave of the Prophet ﷺ. You go to Medina, you see Abu Bakr, the Prophet ﷺ, and Umar in a row. This is a deen where the most difficult day is the greatest day for the believer, because we will not be asleep any longer. This is the day of Allah. So we saw this with the Mongolians, that when the ummah seemed like it was going to break, it did not break. In the life of the Prophet ﷺ, this would have been the day of Uhud. The Prophet ﷺ was so affected by the death of his uncle, Hamza, radiallahu anhu. It was more like his cousin, because they were only 6 months apart. I don't know if you know this. Hamza and the Prophet ﷺ were almost the same age. He was his uncle, but he was more his friend. And when Hamza radiallahu anhu died, the Prophet ﷺ was so affected. Every time they did a funeral prayer after Uhud, he would include Hamza also into the group of the funeral. So they would do janazah for a group, and then Hamza would be added. They would do a janazah for a group, Hamza would be added again. He was so affected. But even on that day, the ummah did not break. There was a companion that was so hurt on that day of Uhud, physically broken, spiritually not broken, physically broken. He was so physically hurt that from that day forward, he had a new nickname. You know what his nickname was? The walking martyr. He was like a shaheed who had lived. So in Medina, they would call him, he was alive, but so barely alive after Uhud, that they called him the walking shaheed. We mentioned Nusayba radiallahu anha had taken 70 wounds. She had taken 70 wounds protecting the Prophet ﷺ. She had become a human shield for the Prophet ﷺ when he was being overcome by the Quraysh. Yet the ummah bent but did not break. When the Muslims arrived back, and Allama Iqbal, the great poet laureate of India, the subcontinent, Pakistan, really the whole region. Iqbal wrote in his poem, Shikwa Jawab Shikwa, we had not even arrived and we were sent out again. Much more beautiful in Urdu. Speaking about this moment, that when the Muslims arrived back from Uhud, it was a sight that we cannot imagine. It's not that 72 companions died on the field of Uhud. That's true. Every single companion. There were about 630, or even a little less, that made it back from Uhud. Because the hypocrites had already left the battle before. 300 of them had left before the battle started. They said that there was a sight that you could not imagine in Medina when the soldiers of Uhud returned. Not only were they grieving the death of so many of their family, of their blessed companions. At the very top was Hamza, radiallahu anhu. But they felt like they had been defeated and they thought they could never be defeated as an army. Because they were with the Prophet ﷺ. They learned that if you disobey the Prophet, even the Muslims can be defeated. And that's a lesson we have to learn today. If we're not with Allah and the Prophet ﷺ, victory is not going to be promised to us. And alhamdulillah, we see the people of Gaza, they are so firmly with Allah and the Prophet ﷺ. Victory is promised to them. And may Allah give us victory also. May Allah give us their iman. They were carrying each other into Medina. They had lost limbs. I don't know if we imagine that if you went to the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, you would see people without hands and legs. Do you know that? Because these are the people who went to Badr and Uhud and all these other wars. And as they were arriving, they were ordered to march back, to not even rest. And they chased the Meccans back to Mecca. The Meccans thought a new army had arrived because the army they had just fought could not have returned, but they did return. And they chased the Meccans back to Mecca, and that is why Uhud is not seen as a clear victory for the Meccans and a loss for the believers, because it was the Muslim army that chased them out back to Mecca. So they did not attack Medina and finish the job. Why am I saying this? Even the day of loss for the believers at Uhud was a day of Allah, and it led to victory. This ummah does not break. We have a lot of young people here today. The second part of the khutbah is directed to you. So we're going to make dua right now, and it's going to be 2 minutes. But I want everyone that's younger than 16 or 18 to sit up right now. Sit up. You are a young companion of the Prophet ﷺ, so you have to sit up. Don't stand up, you can sit down, but sit up upright. And I want you to receive the second khutbah directly to your heart. Ask Allah for forgiveness, for He's the one. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Abdullah bin Masud radiallahu anhu, one of the young companions. And this is once again for everyone that's here from school, and then of course for all of us, we can all benefit inshallah from this. But this is specifically for our young brothers and sisters. Abdullah bin Masud radiallahu anhu, when he became Muslim, some say it was Mu'adh bin Jabal, but I think it was Abdullah, he went to the Kaaba and he began to recite Quran. And as he was reciting Quran, the Quraysh gathered around him. Are you guys with me? Young men, you with me? Young ladies in the back, are you with me? The Quraysh gathered around him and they started to beat him up as he was reading Quran. And he came to the Prophet ﷺ and his face was filled with blood. And the Prophet ﷺ with his own blessed hand wiped his face. Said, "Ya, oh my companion, what happened?" And as he wiped over his mouth, the blood, it was so much blood, he couldn't see him. He wiped over his mouth, he saw he was smiling. He saw he was smiling. He says, "Ya Rasulullah, I read the Quran at the Kaaba." He wasn't focusing on, they beat me up. He said, "I read the Quran publicly." And the Prophet ﷺ made dua for him. The next day, he went back to the Kaaba and he recited Quran again. And they beat him up again. This deen is made of men and women who just would not quit. So my brothers and sisters, if you're struggling, my young brothers and sisters, if you're struggling the way I am with what's happening in the world, if you're struggling being a young Muslim in school, whether it's a Muslim school or a public school, take strength from the fact that you're struggling is a sign that Allah wants you to get strong. Our ummah had gotten too comfortable. Our lives had gotten too comfortable. I see this every time I put my child to sleep or my wife puts my child to sleep. We have sound machines, cameras, this and that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has shaken us up, awakened us because He wants us to become strong. Mike Tyson said, I used to run before boxing. I would run at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. I wanted to be running when I knew the one I'm going to fight is sleeping. Allah has woken us up. Some of us are not able to sleep at night anymore. Allah wants us to be praying when our enemies are sleeping. When the ones who want us harm are asleep. So I end where I began. This is the day of Allah. Allah has given us breath when many people went to sleep last night, including my wife's aunt, may Allah have mercy on her, believing that she will reach Jummah and leaving this world without another Jummah prayer. So let us have a moment of gratefulness for this life that we're in. A moment of gratefulness Allah allowed us to reach this Jummah. We pray to Allah that He allows us to reach Ramadan. So many of our brothers and sisters are not reaching this Ramadan. So many of our blessed brothers and sisters in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, going to Afghanistan, in Gaza, in our own communities, where my family member died in Pakistan, that will not reach this Ramadan. And so if we have breath, let us spend that breath with courage. We are not going to break as a community. We are not going to break as individuals, inshallah. We are going to say, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There is no strength or power except Allah. And with those words, we will have courage to meet this day, to meet this night. And if this is our last night, return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if Allah gives us another day, we will wake up with another day of gratefulness and courage. Inshallah. Please join me in dua. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين وأقيموا الصلاة.